It all starts just outside a doctor's office, where the main doctor seems deeply concerned. While the protagonist's parents anxiously ask about their son's health, after an uncomfortable moment of silence, the doctor, visibly nervous, asks what they do for a living, and the father responds that he is a sumo wrestler, ranked Grand Champion Yokozuna. Then when they ask what the health issue is, the doctor becomes so agitated that he throws the report into the ground, saying that the child is healthy but shows them an X-ray, in which the little boy's body looks so round that it resembles a ball. He explains that it is likely a genetic factor, since the child's metabolism turns everything he eats into fat, and assures them that he will probably never lose weight, and will be a victim of bullying upon hearing this. The child is deeply traumatized, crushes his snack pack, and promises that from that day on he will do everything possible to lose weight. From then on, he exercises every day without exception, but instead of losing weight, his body keeps gaining mass. At 7 years old, he already weighs 83 kilos. He tries swimming and doing different types of exercises, but by 9 years old he already reaches 120 kilos, and at 11 he weighs 180, being so big that when there are car races, he manages to overtake them by running, causing chaos around him. Even in fast food restaurants, he only consumes salads and raw foods, never junk food, and although he climbs mountains and lifts weights, nothing seems to work later in the present. A boy is playing video games in class until a classmate asks him to pay attention and questions whether he isn't afraid of the teacher, to which he replies laughing that the teacher can't see him because he is sitting behind the protector of all men, the great dad Shin. The protagonist, who is now 16 years old and weighs 420 kilos, is so enormous that he covers completely the back half of the classroom, allowing the students behind him to relax, because they cannot be seen by the teacher, although the doctor warned him he would be alone. The protagonist thinks that he actually has friends, since others call him Great Dad and pay him money to protect them from bullies, seeing him as a figure of defense. A classmate even gives him a chocolate bar and asks him to sit in front in the next class, but the protagonist replies that he is on a diet and only drinks bitter melon or celery juice, and the other says he has already prepared those drinks. However, while drinking, the protagonist feels uncomfortable, because although he considers them friends, he feels that they see him more as a father figure than as an equal. Suddenly, someone throws a ball at his face and a group of boys starts mocking him, demanding money because they want to buy something. The protagonist watches them calmly as they threaten him, saying that it would be wise to give them the money if he doesn't want to get beaten up. The nearby students panic upon noticing that the attackers are third-year students and members of the boxing club, so the protagonist sighs, turns around and walks away, but before he does, he asks a classmate for a metal ball, which he throws with such force at the soccer goal that it causes a huge dent in the iron frame. The bullies, seeing him pick up another ball, get scared and run away, yelling to watch out at that moment. The protagonist reflects that his size and strength make him powerful, but also condemn him to loneliness. Meanwhile, the blonde bully says that what happened was humiliating, and they must get revenge, so as not to lose their pride, to which another responds that the protagonist looks like a tank, and doesn't even look human, though the blonde suggests that there's another way to get revenge. The scene shifts then to a gym where the protagonist lifts weights, unaware that outside the bullies are watching him, since they discovered that he trains there every day. One of them wonders why someone so strong trains in secret every day, but the gray-haired one warns him that if they provoke Big Daddy again, they might not escape. Although he admits that he can't beat him in a direct confrontation, he thinks at least he can annoy him, so he pulls out chains and locks from his backpack and blocks all the exits of the gym, then lights a cigarette, throws it on the ground, lit, and leaves. Meanwhile, inside the gym, the protagonist pulls out an inflatable pool and other items from his bag. He inflates it with his mouth, fills it with water, places a wooden board on the surface, and lies down on it, marking the water level with a cutter, then gets out of the water, places metal balls on the board until matching the marked level, and finally weighs them on a scale, discovering that his weight is 421 kilos, comparable to that of an elephant, which makes him burst into tears, noticing that he has gained another kilo. However, at that moment he realizes that the fire is starting to spread inside the gym. He wonders how it could have started, and without thinking twice, pours all the water from the pool over himself, and starts banging on the doors hard, trying to break them down and escape. He finally manages to break through, but when he comes out, he collapses on the floor, convinced that he is going to die. The entire gym burns down completely, leaving only stones and debris. Suddenly a hand emerges from the rubble, and miraculously the protagonist appears completely slim, looking at himself in a nearby mirror. He is shocked, initially believing it to be another person, and asks if they also got trapped in the fire. In fury, he grabs the mirror, which breaks and cuts his hand. When he touches his face, he is surprised to discover that it is really him, who is now handsome and can't believe it. At that moment, he hears the arrival of patrols and fire trucks, and realizes that he is completely naked at the scene of a fire, so he can't let himself be seen like that. He finds a flag to cover his body. Then the scene shifts to the streets of the city, where people walk normally until the protagonist runs past two girls who, instead of getting angry, are left amazed and enchanted by his appearance. Then he passes by some elderly women dancing in the street, and they too fall for him instantly. A man talking on the phone in his car sees him running by naked, gets distracted and crashes into a tree. Desperately, he starts crying, saying his followers only want to see videos of his rabid dog character, and don't pay attention to his other content. The protagonist keeps running, but soon finds himself completely surrounded by girls and women, making him wonder if he has reached the highest level of attractiveness. The women chase him, saying he's showing youthful spirit. Some call him a pervert, but they acknowledge he's incredibly handsome at the same time, and ask for his contact information. He feels embarrassed and remembers his past when students surrounded him. Although now the situation feels different yet strangely similar. He planned to sneak home, but people keep chasing him, until suddenly he feels a very intense hunger without knowing why. The scene changes to the teacher's lounge at school, where a teacher receives a call from the protagonist's parents saying their son is sick. The teacher is stunned and wonders how this could be possible. What virus could make someone like him sick, and even searches online for biological viruses like the T virus, questioning if humanity is at risk of extinction. Then the story shifts to the protagonist's house, where his computer shows searches for rapid weight loss. He is sitting on the couch watching a youth idol show, and when the dancers start moving, he copies every single step they take on screen, surprised that he can follow the entire choreography with ease and how light he feels in his body, even compared to the artists. Seeing himself in the mirror, he wonders if this is really how he looks. Now that he has lost weight, and although for a moment he thinks it's a dream, the physical sensations confirm that it's all real. He laughs in relief, realizing he's not dreaming. But at that very moment, his stomach starts making noises, and he feels a deep hunger. On the floor, there are empty wrappers from fast food and snack packages. He has eaten all the food in his house, and this is his 5th meal of the day. The scene opens in front of a hospital inside the doctor. Can't believe the protagonist looked different just the day before. He points at him and asks if he's really the same person. The protagonist confirms he is, and the surprised doctor orders a full-body checkup including height measurement and tomography 2 hours later. The results come in, and the doctor informs an incredulous patient that his blood pressure, cholesterol, and all protein levels are perfectly normal. He tells him that if he hadn't seen his medical history in person, he would think they were trying to trick him, but he has to admit that he is completely healthy. So healthy it seems unreal. The protagonist asks if that's a good or bad thing, since he lost all his weight overnight and can't stop feeling hungry. On top of that, he has spent $3,800 just to find out he's healthy. The doctor responds ironically, asking what he expected if in just 2 hours he made his 40 years of medical experience useless. Half an hour later, the protagonist walks through a crosswalk, reflecting that his checkup was pointless. Since the night he burned himself, he hasn't stopped feeling unbearable hunger. He watches 2 girls, but in reality, he is staring at a bun one of them is holding, feeling like he has a black hole in his stomach. As he keeps walking, he notices food in the hands of everyone he passes, and his hunger intensifies, to the point that he starts to run, saliva dripping from his mouth, thinking he has so much hunger that his stomach is eating itself, and if this continues, he could lose his mind and become a cannibal. To stop his hunger, the protagonist decided to go to a restaurant called BFC, where a young woman asked him what he wanted to order. He slammed the counter and demanded that they serve him all the food available in the place with double portions for each dish. After that, he moved to another establishment and asked for everything they had in stock. He continued to another place where he ate all the food and then repeated the same at a 4th place. Finally, he returned home completely satisfied, having gathered all the possible food to consume later. At that moment, he remembered a scene from his childhood. While eating a hamburger, he asked his parents what that delicious thing was. His mother tenderly told him that as long as he was happy, it didn't matter. But his father approached seriously and told him he should remember its name, as that was junk food. In the present, the protagonist broke down in tears, saying he hadn't eaten junk food since that day because for 10 years he had followed a strict vegan diet to lose weight. He cried inconsolably, stating how much he missed that food he loved so much. Later, while reflecting quietly, he thought that even though he was full at that moment and had stored some food for later, considering the appetite he had recently, what he gathered would barely last him a single day. Some food for later, considering the appetite he had been having recently, the gathered food would barely last him a single day, which caused him deep sadness. Determined to find a solution, he used medicine from China to lose weight, and he held the bottle in his hands, remembering that when he was overweight, he was afraid to eat, but now, being slim, his appetite had multiplied by 20. Convinced that the only way to calm that hunger was to resort to untested remedies, he hoped that the treatment would be effective. However, after holding the bottle for too long, it began to heat up. Suddenly, he dropped it when he heard a sound like boiling water. All the liquid spilled onto his body, surprising him. He realized he didn't feel any burns, which was strange since the bottle wasn't even on the stove. Observing his hands, he tried to check his body temperature, but when he touched the thermometer, it exploded. Then he resorted to a cooking thermometer, and to his amazement, he discovered that his body temperature had reached 230 degrees. Over the next 3 days, he dedicated himself to testing his body and discovered 3 significant changes. His height had decreased from 220 centimeters to approximately 187. His weight had dropped from 480 kilos to just 62, and his appetite had increased 20 times. Additionally, his metabolic rate had skyrocketed to the point where his hands heated up quickly while eating, burning calories at an alarming rate. If he didn't eat frequently, the feeling of extreme hunger overwhelmed him. His hands continued to raise their temperature uncontrollably. He also discovered that his body had become completely immune to heat. Later, he received a notification on his mobile phone, indicating very high physical maintenance costs a week later. He finally returned to school. 2 classmates were talking about the great dad until they were surprised. Seeing that all the students on the balcony were watching a tall and attractive young man, one of them sadly commented that he thought the great dad hadn't come, but both were stunned to see that all eyes were on that new figure. The protagonist understood that this was what happened when someone became physically attractive. Women felt drawn, and men were left in shock. However, when they asked who he was, no one recognized him. This indifference filled him with frustration, as he had hoped his transformation would generate admiration, and it hurt him deeply to go unnoticed. Then a girl called him and asked if he was the boy she had seen in her dream the night before. At that moment, he responded angrily that he was the great dad Shintan. Everyone fell silent, not believing him, so he began to recount in detail all the difficult situations they had lived through together, including the case of a classmate who was attacked by 17 people. Then he started revealing personal secrets of each of those present, which finally made them recognize him. They all confirmed that yes, he really was the great dad Shintan. The girls fell, head over heels for him because of his new appearance. They started calling him daddy and surrounded him, while the other boys began to cry, lamenting that all the girls would have gone with him, convinced they would be alone forever. At that moment in the classroom, the teacher enthusiastically announced that the great dad had returned, which caused the general joy of the class. After his arrival, the protagonist calmly headed to his seat. Just as the lesson was about to begin, however, the student sitting behind him pulled out a monitor and a controller to start playing, while the girl sitting behind that boy began to dance slowly. All the students at the back started doing whatever they wanted instead of studying. However, there was one student who felt frustrated. Although this time the situation was different, the girl next to the player asked him to pay attention and questioned if he wasn't afraid of getting caught by the teacher. But he arrogantly replied, asking who would catch him since the teacher couldn't do anything because he was sitting behind the symbol of freedom, the guardian of the class, the great dad Shintan. What he had forgotten was that the protagonist no longer had his giant form. Now he was thin and short. As soon as he made eye contact with the teacher, all the students rushed back to their seats and pretended to act normal, but quickly began to cry, lamenting the loss of their freedom, saying it was as if a lumberjack had cut down their refuge and home. A girl broke down in tears, saying that at home she wasn't allowed to dance and that this was her only chance to pursue her dream. The protagonist looked at her and waved his hand. Seeing this, the girl, still crying, began to say that he was incredibly handsome. During the lunch break, the same boy from before stood up, visibly nervous. The blonde boy approached him and said that the great dad Shintan had returned and asked if he thought he was going to kill him. Hearing this, he got scared, grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, and shouted that how would he know? He didn't even know the gym was going to catch fire that night. Then the blonde reminded him that they had left the locks in place and that sooner or later they would be discovered. Faced with the possibility that the protagonist would come after them, one suggested that in that case, they would have to eliminate him first. The terrified blonde replied that he would rather see him jump off a building than witness how they beat him to leave him alive. The gray-haired boy assured him that he was already prepared, but the blonde asked him not to involve him this time. However, his companion replied that even if he didn't participate, when the protagonist discovered the truth about the fire, he would still beat him to death. After saying that, he went off to cry in a corner, lamenting not having been a good person from the start. His friend told him to shut up and repeated that he was ready, then asked if he had seen the protagonist lately, to which he replied that yes, he was now slim, and that some even said he had undergone liposuction, claiming that this was the perfect moment to act since weight was crucial in a fight, and in his opinion, the protagonist was in his weakest form. Then they headed to an old shed. The confused blonde asked where he had been taken, but his companion asked him to just observe. In front of them were several thugs sitting, and the gray-haired boy explained that they were the most ruthless bullies from nearby 20th Street. The leader of the group, upon hearing the reason for their meeting, stood up from his throne and fell to the ground, shouting if they wanted him to smash them because he understood that he had been called to eat deep and hot. Another member of the group began to tremble and said he thought they were going to eat crabs. That's why he brought his knife. The gray-haired boy tried to calm them down, assuring them that the protagonist wasn't going to eat them, that he would probably throw a party if they managed to defeat him. However, the group leader fell to the ground saying that all of that was a scam. Another more reluctant member explained that facing the protagonist would leave them financially set for life. But he confessed that he had already faced him once when he was defending a bullied student. In that encounter, Chintan had held him so tightly that he broke his arm, leaving him with a traumatic and indelible memory. Upon hearing the name of the legendary fighter, another thug who had a knife visibly became nervous. When they heard the name Big Daddy Chintan again, the whole group started crying in desperate whispers, repeating that they wouldn't risk their lives facing someone like that. The knife thug ripped off his shirt to show scars he had from a previous encounter, and recounted in a trembling voice how the protagonist had cornered him against a wall and ripped off his tattoo with friction, leaving him marked for life. Other members began to cry as well, lamenting having to face such a damn opponent. Then the gray-haired boy tried to calm them down by showing a recent photograph of Shin Chan. At first, the gang members refused to look at it out of fear, but when they finally looked at the image, they were stunned to see a young, slim, almost fragile-looking guy who seemed anything but a threat. The gray-haired boy explained that it was indeed the same Big Daddy Chintan who, after being engulfed in flames, had undergone surgery and lost a considerable amount of weight. The gang fell silent, trying to process such a radical transformation. It was then that the knife thug asked the leader what they should do. After a few moments of reflection, the group leader thought they might have a chance and proposed a simple plan: to ambush the weakened Shintan and attack him as a group. The scene shifted to the school where a blonde-haired student, visibly nervous, he approached the protagonist's desk with the task of placing a fake love letter that would serve as a trap. He believed no young person could resist a romantic confession. However, upon sliding the letter under the desk, he was surprised to find hundreds of genuine love letters already there. In a panic over his deception, he gathered all the letters into a bag and took them to burn them. As he walked, he realized that after doing something so vile, he could never consider himself a good person. Later, when Shin-chan returned to his seat and found the only letter left, he read it and was visibly frustrated. The content clearly irritated him. Upon leaving school, he was intercepted by several gang members on the street. Despite their threatening appearances and defiant attitude, the protagonist showed no fear. The gray-haired member mocked him, claiming he surely hadn't suspected that his date with a beautiful girl was actually a trap to lure him in, and proclaimed that this would be his last day. However, Chintan calmly responded that he had known from the beginning it was a trap, since only someone like the gray-haired thug would write a love letter that seemed more like a threat. Recognizing the familiar faces, he sarcastically asked if they didn't feel an itch on their skin, implying they were about to get beaten up. The gray-haired thug tried to motivate his companions by calling them experienced killers and questioning why they were behaving so fearfully, but the others were so terrified they could barely stand. The gang leader and the knife-wielding thug quickly made up an excuse, saying they were just taking a walk and it was a coincidence they happened to pass by when the gray-haired boy insisted they were there to hit Shintan. The others abruptly silenced him, asking if he wanted to die, and warning him not to drag them into a suicide mission. Amid such fear, the protagonist, sensing the panic in the air, decided to demonstrate his power by punching a nearby wall. But instead of the expected impact, he felt a sharp pain, heard cracking sounds, and saw his hand starting to bleed rapidly. He covered it up. Confused by the intense pain, he wondered if he had lost his strength after losing weight. It was at that moment he realized he was in a dangerous situation and that physical appearance was nothing compared to real strength. He bitterly reflected that people only value power when they have already lost it, and he broke down in tears, recalling how strong he used to be. Despite his internal struggle, his presence still remained so intimidating that it kept the gangsters at bay. However, the group leader observed closely and noticed something was off. If Big Daddy Shin had been in top shape, the wall would have shattered. Suspecting that his legendary enemy had indeed weakened, he ordered the gray-haired thug to attack first, since he was the one who got them into this mess. He approached the protagonist with false kindness and said it had all been a misunderstanding, that he didn't want to provoke anyone. He extended his hand, saying he had only come to congratulate him on leaving the hospital and to apologize. However, he had a hidden plan. He intended to grip the protagonist's hand tightly to test his true physical state. As Shintan observed the outstretched hand, he noticed his was emitting steam due to the heat, and the moment he took the thug's hand, the thug immediately began to scream in pain. Completely unable to free himself from the burning grip, the other gang members, witnessing such a display of power, fled in terror, convinced that Shintan was still as dangerous as before. While escaping, they blamed the gray-haired guy for leading them straight into a deadly trap. Leaving him lying on the ground, motionless, for his part, Shinhan observed his own smoking hand. As exhaustion completely overwhelmed him, the effort almost caused him to lose consciousness, and he was about to collapse. Wondering if he had really become so weak and what he would do with his life moving forward, finally, his body couldn't take it anymore, and he fainted. A while later, a young woman appeared and stood in front of the unconscious protagonist, holding an object in her hands. It was a circular object that seemed to have a magical aura. Meanwhile, Shintan found himself in an environment resembling water, where a figure appeared before him. When he asked who it was, the figure replied that it was someone from his soul who had accompanied him for 1,000 years. The protagonist looked at him with annoyance, and the figure, somewhat offended, complained that he was ruining the atmosphere of their first meeting in a millennium. It then explained that it had appeared because Shintan was in a critical stage between life and death, but promised to explain everything in more detail when he was alone and awake. When the protagonist opened his eyes, he saw the young woman giving him something soft to drink. But suddenly, he reacted with a scream. She quickly apologized, saying she hadn't found another way to wake him up. She explained that she had noticed how his body trembled every time she shouted the name of some food. She introduced herself as the same girl who had asked him a question in the hallway some time ago, recounting that she had found him unconscious in an alley, and that she was about to call for emergency services when she heard his body start to make stomach noises. Scared, she took him quickly to the nearest convenience store. No matter how much she tried to wake him by shaking him, he didn't react. However, she discovered that when mentioning foods like hamburgers, pizza, or fries, his body would tremble, and she realized that the protagonist had fainted from hunger. That's why he bought a large soda and poured it into his mouth with a sarcastic smile. He accused her of having fun with his unconscious body, to which she replied, somewhat embarrassed, that if anyone ever bothered her, she would tell him. As he was about to leave, the girl called out to him and asked him to eat well, not to starve himself, and to take care of his health. This made the protagonist blush. Then she asked him to add her as a contact, to which he agreed. That night, back at home, Shintan recalled the dream he had while fainting, reliving the voice he had heard. While he was engulfed in flames during the fire, a voice promised they would meet again when he was alone. Suddenly, he felt a burning sensation in his chest, and the spirit from his dream materialized again. The protagonist looked at it with anger. Thinking that the scene seemed straight out of a fantasy novel, he grabbed a wooden stick and pointed it at the spirit. He demanded that it explain what it was in 3 sentences or he would hit it. From experience, the spirit introduced itself, saying it had been born from fire. It had awakened with the fire and had now returned to Chintan. Its name was Jungli. Also known as Dawn, it had been asleep inside him for 1,000 years as his companion from a past life. The The protagonist, annoyed, pointed out that was more than 3 sentences, and that it still hadn't explained what kind of being it was. The spirit replied that it was impatient. It revealed that it was actually the lord of his previous life, a persistent soul tied to his current existence, which meant it had witnessed everything the protagonist had done lately, including the time he danced in front of the mirror. Then it explained that it was indeed his companion, but not in this life. Instead, it was in a past era where the great-grandpa Shintan had been its wife. Upon hearing this, the protagonist reacted immediately and hit it with the wooden stick, sending the spirit flying through the air. While the spirit protested the attack, the protagonist shouted that those 3 heartbreaking sentences had caused him too strong of an emotional impact. As a result, Shintan began to wonder if his current body still had enough strength to break through walls with a single blow, which led the spirit to ask him to calm down. The spirit itself admitted it was also in shock, since it had just awakened and discovered that its wife from the past life was now a man. It nostalgically remembered how, in that previous era, it used to call him darling every day. The word darling sparked a flash in Chintan's mind, who relived scenes from his past life. The spirit in human form brought breakfast to his wife and handed her his monthly pay, encouraging her to wake up early. She, for her part, would yell for him to go away, and he, far from getting annoyed, would respond with tenderness that her bad temper was charming. But the memory turned bitter when it showed how the wife woke up, not for him, but for another man who was hiding in the closet, embracing him passionately, and telling him how much he had missed him, before kissing him intensely. Seeing the look of shock and sadness on Chintan's face, the spirit asked if he had remembered something important from his past life, pointing out that even though that past existence didn't have a direct connection to the current one, the memories still held significance. The protagonist questioned why he suddenly felt so miserable. It was then that the spirit began to explain what was happening with his body. Since Chintan had lost weight, his hands sometimes burned and emitted smoke, and it was all because the spirit's natal flame resided within him, revealed that in his past era, he had been one of the oldest fire cultivators in the world, known as the God of Fire. He recounted that, at that time, a mountain near his village collapsed, and giant stones rained down. The villagers, desperate, came to him for help, and with complete confidence, he told them not to panic and promised to handle the situation. He began to recite magical words while pointing his fingers at the falling rocks, but nothing happened, and he was crushed by a huge stone before he died. He deposited his natal flame inside his beloved wife, assuring her that as long as this flame resided in her, fire could never harm her, and his remaining soul could watch over her, and perhaps one day, awaken, staying by her side. However, she never understood what that meant. 3 months later, his wife, Lucia, exhausted, desperately devoured anything she found, since the flame consumed everything and needed constant fuel by absorbing the energy from the host body. When there was no fat left to burn, it began to consume vital organs like the heart or the lungs in an era where resources were scarce. His wife did not survive for long. After finishing his story, Shintan pointed out that there were many problematic elements in that tale, but he tried to console the God of Fire by telling him that his wife never truly loved him, and that he shouldn't hold on to that. The melancholic spirit confessed that he still missed her and added that she had a beautiful body. When he began to approach the protagonist again, the latter stepped back alarmed, accusing him of being crazy and asking why he was coming closer. The God of Fire apologized, saying that the wife of his past life had no relation to the great Chintan of the present. He added that although the protagonist had been reborn many times, he had never been touched by fire until now. Frustrated, Shintan said that all this explanation only made him more eager to hit the spirit, who continued saying that the natal flame he had left in him had been activated, and that was what had transformed his body. In summary, Chintan's body had become an oven, and the natal flame was the ignited fuel. The heat generated was coming out through his hands, and the energy used came from his own body. When asking if there was a way to turn off that faulty furnace, the God of Fire replied that since he dared to leave the flame behind, he naturally knew a method to control it. This answer filled the protagonist with relief, until the spirit confessed that he had forgotten the method since he was nothing more than a residual fragment of soul after 1,000 years. Furious, Chintan threatened to hit him again, demanding that he leave his body along with the ghost fire, when suddenly his stomach roared loudly. He hadn't eaten anything for 2 hours, since he returned home, and was on the brink of fainting from hunger. He checked his account balance on his phone and discovered that he didn't have enough money to buy a bite. Lying on the ground, weak, he called the god of fire to bring him the food he had left on the table, since he felt that if he didn't eat soon, he would die. The day before, he had ordered takeout and had consumed everything left in his house. Finally, tasting a bite of the malotang broth, his body came back to life, and the spirit, watching the scene, asked him if he was so excited about such fragrant food. The protagonist replied that this broth was the reason he was still alive, and that if he ever starved to death, it would be the god of fire's fault. The spirit, with a loving tone, called him Tian Tiang, which made the protagonist indignantly demand that he stop using that disgusting nickname. Instead, he proposed that in this life they be brothers or even father and son, threatening him that if he called him Tiang again, he would call him something worse. After an awkward silence, the spirit raised his thumb and agreed to be good brothers. Later, Chintan spent an hour curled up in a corner trying to assimilate all the information from that strange situation. He calculated that with an appetite far greater than that of a normal person, equivalent to 71 steamed buns drenched in malotang broth, his food expenses would exceed 10,000 jones. His parents, who were overseas, strictly monitored his finances, so it was unlikely they would send him home money just for food. Faced with this crisis, he considered the possibility of becoming a food content creator to earn income. But before achieving that, he didn't know how he would survive until his next meal. At that moment, his phone vibrated with a message. The god of fire asked him what that shiny, noisy box he had in his pocket was. It was a message from the girl who had helped him before. She asked if he remembered her, mentioning that she was the one who poured the soda down his throat when he was passed out. She asked him for a favor and said they could talk at school the next day, even offering to pay him and provide food. Upon reading the word food, Chintan accepted without hesitation and ran out. The god of fire asked him where he was going, and he responded with a single word: survival. The next day, he met the young woman at a restaurant, where he apologized for summoning her so late, explaining that his situation was truly critical. She got straight to the point, but he was worried. He asked if someone was harassing her. However, the girl explained that she wanted to hire him to work at her house. Surprised by the proposal, he listened as she told him that her family owned a gym and that they had been watching him. Since the school year started, she suggested that he work for them for a while and participate in before and after photo sessions for weight loss. In exchange, she offered him whatever he wanted. Chintan, without hesitation, told her that he didn't need money, that food was more than enough. The next day, in front of the gym, the protagonist was next to a poster showing his previous appearance alongside his new image. A crowd had gathered at the entrance, and the young woman, surprised, admitted she had never seen so many people together. It seemed that all the women in the area had gathered there. Upon closer observation, she noticed that less than half were interested in signing up for the gym. The rest were simply drooling over Chintan. One of them asked him if she could be his personal trainer. He, somewhat shy, replied that he didn't feel ready to be a coach, but that he would do his best. The excited girl ran to fill out the form and signed up for 3 years. Another young woman asked if she could touch his chest muscles to check the physical results, and although he spoke timidly, he pulled her closer, which made her blush deeply. The protagonist found that situation familiar, as in the past, the boys at school would also jump on his chest and call him daddy, only now it was girls doing it. Another young woman ran to the counter, saying that she wanted to sign up for 5 years in the premium plan. By noon, the gym owner asked Chintan what he wanted to eat, mentioning that they had gained over 300 new members that same morning. Looking at the menu, he replied that he wanted 5 portions of everything, and when asked if he planned to get fat again, he also asked them to pack the leftovers to go. He also requested a training room, since he needed to strengthen his body. As he headed to training, he thought that now that his food problem was resolved, it was time to regain his strength and take the initiative. At school, 2 big legends circulated about fights. The first was about the one previously known as the invincible fat guy. The second was even older and didn't talk about a student, but about the school's own discipline director. A scene showed a young woman apologizing for being late, explaining that she had stayed up late studying. The director replied that she shouldn't rush and needed to fix her appearance before letting him in, even though he warned that no matter how he arrived, he would still receive a reprimand for being late. Still, he asked him not to stay up late again, calling her his most prized student. That man was Lim Pochin, 28 years old. At that moment, he noticed another student trying to sneak in, and seeing that it was already 10, he stopped him, saying that he was also late. Noticing that the student had an injured hand, he asked what had happened to him. Visibly annoyed, he said he had fallen and only scraped himself. Lim Pochin corrected him, saying it wasn't a scrape, but a burn, and warned him with a disturbing expression not to lie to him, suggesting that someone had hurt his prize student. The scene then changed to an exam room where students were taking a test. One with a gang-like appearance was shamelessly copying. The teacher in charge caught him and asked him to hand over his answer sheets. The defiant student asked aggressively who he thought he was and grabbed him by the neck. The teacher calmly repeated his request while holding his wrist. The student, surprised by the teacher's strength, couldn't free himself. Frustrated, he threw his exam sheet, saying that the test wasn't worth anything and threatened to confront him outside. The teacher simply let him leave without a word. Later it was learned that the student was the brother of one of the local gang members. That same afternoon, the older brother appeared at the school entrance and asked if the teacher was the one who confronted his brother. Upon confirming it, the gang member suggested they step away from the school to avoid a violent scene. However, things didn't go as expected when students alerted by the shouting called the police. The officers arrived at a chilling scene. The teacher, covered in blood, was calmly grading exams, while around him lay the injured bodies of the 23 involved. 18 had fractures, and 3 were seriously injured. Only 2 came out unscathed. Amidst the groans of pain, the teacher continued grading unfazed, and at his feet, the student who had threatened revenge trembled in fear. The police, seeing the scene, were left petrified. The teacher, with a kind smile, apologized, saying he had been threatened and that he might have gone a little overboard. Since that day, Lin Pochin became a legend within the school. In the present, while Shin, Tan trained boxing at the gym, the gray-haired gang member reflected on how to escape the situation he was in. It was then that the teacher put a hand on his shoulder and asked if he was a third-year student. The gang member realized there was no way to deceive him, but an idea came to him. What if he used that teacher as a tool for revenge? Trembling, he asked if he remembered a student named Big Daddy Shin Tan from the second year. The teacher said he had indeed taught at that level but didn't particularly recognize that name, although he vaguely remembered a sturdy boy. Upon hearing this, the gang member got excited, saying he was only asking out of curiosity, but added that he had a burn on his hand, caused by someone with that same name. Although with a completely opposite build, he claimed that individual had threatened him, pretending to shake his hand and burning him with something hidden, and that he had passed out because of it. He started crying, saying he was terrified. Just thinking about the incident made his body tremble, and he hadn't been able to do his homework. Since then, due to the trauma, the teacher told him not to worry about the homework, and he would talk to his guidance teacher himself. Just as the gang member was leaving, Ling Po-chin stopped him and asked if he could help him find Chintan. Meanwhile, in the gym, Chintan, completely exhausted after an intense workout, listened to the spirit who proudly told him, "Look, your current physical condition is incredible. No back pain, no leg pain. You can throw hundreds of punches without getting winded. That's because my vital flame has consumed all the unnecessary and useless parts of your body, dear. Your physical condition is now above that of any other young person." Yet Shintan mentioned he had taken a week to adapt to his part-time job and to experiment with the gym equipment. But no matter what he did, it was clear he was having a lot of difficulties. Frustrated, he grabbed the fire god and asked him to stop joking, remembering he used to be able to break punching bags with a single blow. While the protagonist complained, the spirit, shaken by his words, responded that even though he was weaker now, he had become much more handsome in that instant. The school teacher appeared outside the gym, and upon entering, found him struggling to lift some weights up to his shoulders. It was evident he had reached his limit. Chintan was upset about his weakness. His current body was too skinny. In the past, he could easily lift heavy loads and thought all that effort was pointless. The teacher approached. He easily took the same weights and smiled, commenting that the young man was quite weak and also didn't seem like a bad person. He then approached the student and asked if he was Chintan. Upon receiving a positive response, he dropped the weights and launched an attack. His fist was about to hit his face, but the protagonist managed to block it with his hand. However, the impact made him slide back and his hand started to bleed. The teacher, surprised, thought that punch should have broken his nose. He wondered if he was facing a veteran given how fast his reflexes were. For his part, Shintan could barely comprehend what he had felt. That single blow made him feel like he had been hit by a car, and he was about to faint. He asked the man who he was, to which he coldly replied, "I am the retribution of all the people you have hurt." Shintan narrowed his eyes and coldly responded, "So you're one of his accomplices." There's nothing more to say. Before he could move, the spirit beside him urged him to wait and channeled magical energy into his hands. The master noticed it starting to emerge. Smoke billowed from the young man's fists just as he tied his tie around his hand and lunged forward. Their fists collided with a deafening crash as they fought. The protagonist recalled the moment he decided to lose weight. He had trained for years in various martial arts, but he had never found a worthy opponent. He remembered a student who used to challenge all newcomers, boasting that he would make them cry in the first fight. He told the same to him, confident that even someone as fat as Shintan would fall easily. However, Shintan had stopped him with one hand, holding him by the head. Later, that same day, while the master was quietly eating his soup, a student burst in to announce that his superior, Lombatian, had been defeated and was crying outside the classroom. The master remained calm and told them to return to their training, saying he would handle the new student himself, since it was just a minor issue. Nevertheless, Shintan had sent him flying with one blow. The master, while falling, asked him to be gentler, wondering how it was possible for someone with such a poor build to have so much strength, to which Shintan replied that he was actually going easy. It was then that the protagonist realized he might never find a real rival in his life, unless he weakened and lost weight. And yet now, for the first time, he faced true adversity. The master was like a small boat trying to withstand the storm of his fists, while Shintan struggled to stay on his feet. The master stopped and praised him, saying that 10 minutes had passed and he still hadn't given up. He confessed that he was starting to admire him, but Shintan, panting, yelled for him to shut up because he had appeared out of nowhere, hit him without explanation, and now, to top it off, was praising him like it was nothing. He asked if he wanted to infuriate him even more. After exchanging a few more blows, Shintan began to notice something strange. Every time he attacked, the master would stop his own strike, retreat, and dodge. Then, determined, Shintan lunged forward, ready to strike. However, as they fought, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a spark of excitement. It was as if he had finally found what he had been searching for all these years. And with a smile, he shouted that he wanted to see who would fall first. Just at that moment, the door burst open, and a girl walked in, visibly annoyed by the noise. Seeing the master, she asked him in a tone. The sharp one was there, and upon noticing her opponent, she exclaimed in surprise that she had hit the student Shintan, also highlighting how handsome he was. The master froze upon learning that Shintan was enrolled in the school. Later, he approached Shintan to apologize. Admitting he had trusted the wrong person and that it was all his fault, Shintan crossed his arms and told him he had hit him 26 times, so he wanted to return at least one hit. This surprised the girl from the gym. However, the master told him he could do it, and that he would prepare. But instead, Shintan offered him something he had specially prepared, an extremely spicy sauce that he had to consume down to the last drop if he wanted to be forgiven. While the master drank the sauce, Shintan thought it was the first time he faced an opponent he couldn't easily defeat. He didn't know whether to feel happy or annoyed, but at that moment during the fight, his heart had raced. Later, that night, back home, Shintan told the spirit to stay away while he went to sleep. However, the spirit asked him to wait, saying it had something important to tell him. It explained that during the fight, his hands had burst into flames, and that was the first time in 1,000 years he had tried to manipulate fire. Therefore, he realized he had regained some of his memory and powers. In that sense, the spirit had noted 3 things. First, he had discovered a way to return Shintan's body to normal. Second, both the master and the girl seemed suspicious to him. And third, he observed that the girl possessed something a mortal shouldn't have. As for the master, he clearly remembered the aura surrounding him during dinner. Being close to him, he heard him mutter that Lin Pochin was still as irritable and impulsive as ever, and didn't deserve to be called a certain way. That aura, according to the spirit, was not human at all. When Shintan asked what he meant by that, the spirit replied that there was a supreme secret in the world. Despite having been deified in his previous life and ruling over all, he was never satisfied, as he felt a great curiosity for the unknown beyond. Then he remembered how in the past, while alone, his wife approached him and told him to go on an adventure. for 3 whole years without asking questions. He did so, leaving without further ado in his fiery carriage. Shintan thought that probably, during those 3 years, she had fun with the whole village. The spirit continued, saying that when she finally returned, for 3 whole years without asking questions, yes, he did, leaving without more in his fire carriage. Shinchan thought that probably, during those 3 years she had fun with the whole town. The spirit continued, saying that when she finally returned, she had discovered secrets capable of shaking the earth. From then on, she kept moving north without looking back. Although he ended up returning with great knowledge, Shin, so disappointed by the story, rushed, took a book from the shelf and hit the spirit with it, telling it to shut up because he was going to sleep. The spirit, unfazed, asked him if he was interested in his wife. And as Chintan withdrew, he told him he would get straight to the point. He had witnessed many races, strange plants and animals, and because of that, he had collected and organized them, writing 7 medicinal formulas. Intended to warm the spirit and nourish the soul, he especially remembered one of them, and how it was just a breath of soul. He thought that if he could prepare it correctly, he might be able to recover more memory, perhaps even remember how to control the flames. The ingredients for that formula were ginger, garlic, Sichuan pepper, and chili. On the other hand, regarding the teacher and the girl, he explained that the girl possessed something like a compass, an object he had been observing for some time that contained spiritual fluctuations. Maybe it was a family relic, or perhaps she had obtained it by accident. In any case, it wasn't something a common person should have. It was probably some kind of monster hidden among people. The scene changed, showing the teacher, in front of a picture frame and some incense sticks, as he apologized to the photograph, saying he had talked to his old friend again. Once more, he had hurt a student, and had acted wrong while looking at the image. He confessed that he couldn't be like him, that learning to be human was terribly difficult. The next day at school, the striking-haired boy was being hit by the teacher while apologizing for lying. The teacher told him he shouldn't do that. But still, he would forgive him, because he had made a promise to protect all the students there, and he was one of them. That's why he could only forgive him, although he grabbed him by the collar and warned him never to lie again, walking away while adding that if he did it again, he would break his nose and arms. Meanwhile, in another part of the school, several girls blushed and screamed excitedly upon seeing Chintan. Just when the teacher called him, and upon seeing them together, the students began to murmur, saying that the 2 greatest legends of the place were meeting, wondering if something had happened between them. Shintan asked why the teacher was there, and he replied that he thought school was almost over and had come to find him, asking if he wanted to take a walk with him in the bamboo garden. Shintan then recalled what the spirit had told him, that the teacher must be some kind of demon, and glancing at him, the teacher noticed his expression and asked if he distrusted him, clarifying that he didn't have to, that he hadn't been that tense when they had eaten together a few days before. Seeing his face, the teacher deduced that the spirit behind him had told him everything, and both he and Shintan were surprised to notice that he could perceive it. Shintan confirmed it, and the teacher replied that was why his hands had ignited in flames. Since it was now much easier to communicate, he asked Shintan to tell the spirit that he had no bad intentions towards him or the other students, and explained that this area had once been a great bamboo forest before they built the school, although now only a small patch remained. He then confessed that he was not human, and that he was born there. He was a bamboo spirit who had cultivated for 1,000 years to acquire in a human form and had spent countless days in that place until he finally gained consciousness. However, that very night, a celestial tribulation struck him with lightning. The forest was reduced to that small fragment, and he was left severely wounded, returning to his original form until someone took him home. The scene showed the master planting a bamboo shoot, when a passing worker asked him what he was planting, since he looked broken and worn out. The master replied that it was a piece of bamboo he had collected from the place where there was a fire the day before, and that he hoped it could survive. From that moment on, the bamboo stayed there, growing thanks to the water and nutrients. Some time later, a boy tried to impress a girl by writing their names on the bamboo leaves, and another boy threw a ball that hit the plant. This led the bamboo to swear that once it could move, it would kill them all. Later, another student pressed a lit cigarette against a bamboo leaf. A passing student saw them smoking and nervously asked what they were doing. They looked down while continuing to smoke, but one of them shot him a threatening glance that scared him, and another warned him that if he dared to tell anyone what he had seen, they would beat him up, claiming that same guy had already sent 52 people to the hospital just that year, which made the student fill with fear. The bully ordered him to say nothing, and explained that it was all the new teacher's fault, who had recently been transferred. That very morning, he had confiscated their phones after catching them skipping classes and playing in the bathroom, since he was actually inspecting the students' bathrooms, and also forced them to write a 5,000-word essay. The day before, during lunch, one of them had tried to force a student to buy him food, but he was caught, and this time the punishment was an 8,000-word essay and a public apology to the boy. The bully said the teacher had driven them crazy and that they were furious. So he suggested to the student that he should walk away if he didn't want to get beaten up. But at that moment, the group leader intervened and told his subordinate to leave him alone, that it was time to get back to class or they would get caught again. The subordinate, feeling humiliated, muttered that all of this was ridiculous, and asked if that wasn't the same bamboo that the master had planted, adding that next time he would pour boiling water on it. Later, the master was taking care of the bamboo, reflecting on why he couldn't get it to grow well. Suddenly, after a long silence, the bamboo exploded and spoke, saying that it was really angry and that even though it shouldn't talk, even if it lost its cultivation, it had to express itself. The master, confused, wondered where that voice was coming from and if the bamboo had really spoken. Then the bamboo responded, saying not only could it talk, but it could even be the master's father. Right after, it scolded him for being crazy for having picked it and planted it there, surrounded by trees and bushes, being the only bamboo in the whole place and practically the subject of mockery from everyone who passed by. The spirit of the bamboo began to explain that most of the people who had heard it were actually students of the master himself, and furiously demanded to know how many students he had mistreated, saying that he messed with them and they, in turn, messed with him. The master, still surprised, asked how it was possible that it could talk. The bamboo introduced itself as a good spirit, a bamboo spirit struck by lightning, and that it was still in the process of recovering. It thanked the master for saving it, and assured him that once it managed to acquire a human form, it would help him deal with the students. However, it also warned him that not a single student wished him well, that all the delinquents wanted revenge, and that the rest only spoke ill of him behind his back. It asked him to help it recover and to get it out of that place, promising that in return, it would help him get revenge. But the master firmly refused, saying he couldn't allow harm to come to his students. Then, he lifted the bamboo and told it that it was too dangerous to leave it there, so he took it home and planted it in a pot. For a while, life was peaceful, and the bamboo fondly remembered those days. However, one day it asked the master why he didn't allow it to attack the students, to which the master replied that he himself had gone through that rebellious phase, that he didn't think those young people were bad, but that they simply lacked guidance, and that his desire was to show them the beauty of life and help them find the right path. When the master tried to make a comparison between the bamboo and his students, the spirit immediately rejected it, refusing to be treated like one of them. Still, life went on calmly for about 6 months. But the bamboo realized too late that it had made a mistake, since being a spirit, newly formed and struck by lightning, it was weak and had become an ideal target for cultivators. In reality, it shouldn't have stayed with the master. One particular memory was etched in its mind. The master was sitting next to the bamboo, eating watermelon, and the bamboo asked him to pour some juice on its leaves to feel what a human sensation was like. Just as the master was about to do it, someone knocked on the door, and upon opening, he found a group of troublesome students. He asked them why they were there, but noticed something strange in their eyes before he could react. They pushed him aside and began to attack him. The story then flashed back to a scene earlier outside the men's bathroom, where some students were slacking off while 3 delinquents smoked inside. They complained about how the master kept catching them and how their disciplinary grades were dropping so much that they wouldn't be able to graduate. While discussing their frustrations, someone entered the bathroom, not a student they recognized. The group warned him not to enter while they smoked, but the stranger ignored them. One of the delinquents, annoyed, tried to grab him, but was stopped with a single finger, leaving his hand completely numb. The man, calm and serene, said that their violence stemmed from a lack of education. Besides, he wasn't a student, but a cultivator looking for spiritual medicine. He admitted that he had been watching them and began to manipulate their minds and desires. Back at the master's house, chaos erupted as the possessed students violently attacked him. One of them said he had been waiting a long time for the chance to hit him, and when the master tried to defend himself verbally, he was interrupted by a punch mid-sentence. Another shouted that everything would have been fine if he had just left them alone. Even as they grabbed him by the neck, the master remained calm and tried to reason with them, telling them he saw a broader and happier path for them, and that his desire was to show them that path by reaching out towards the pot where the bamboo was. He let go of all resistance, and suddenly the room exploded with energy. The windows shattered, and the students were thrown through the air from the third floor. When he opened his eyes, the master saw the spirit of the bamboo now in human form standing next to him. The bamboo scolded him in a teasing tone for not having rested longer, and mentioned that he had saved his life by throwing the students out. Terrified, the master asked who he was, to which he proudly replied that now, with a human body, he wanted to experience the life path the master often spoke about. The narration jumped to the present where the spirit of the bamboo was telling this story to the protagonist. When the protagonist asked what happened next, he was surprised to learn that nothing else happened. The villain never returned, and the bamboo simply stayed by the master's side, protecting him. However, in that present scene, the bamboo warned the current master that they were in grave danger, as it revealed that the student who had attacked earlier was being controlled, and that there was a cultivator hidden inside the school that was behind the bamboo body. When asked what they should do, the bamboo said they should stick together at all times. Even when going to the bathroom as a solution, he suggested that he be allowed to experience the path of life by becoming a teacher. In the next scene inside the classroom, the teacher held a bamboo stick that was the transformed spirit. While explaining a lesson, the students whispered among themselves, wondering why their teacher, once known for his love of plants, was now walking around with a bamboo pointer. Back to the current timeline. The bamboo recounted that 36 years had passed since he was used as a pointer, but during that time he had achieved total surveillance. The protagonist abruptly interrupted him, telling him to stop talking nonsense, but the bamboo replied firmly, assuring that he had indeed been used for 36 years, and that he had been watching the teacher all that time. Although the villain never showed up, both the protagonist and the spirit felt deeply disappointed by that story. Then the bamboo revealed that the original teacher had passed away a few years ago due to a natural illness, and that his last wish was for the bamboo to continue on the same path of life. That's why he stayed, fulfilling the final wish of his old friend. He added that he still felt as if someone was watching him, possibly the same culprit from then, and asked the protagonist not to reveal that he was not human, as he did not want to betray his friends. The protagonist promised to keep the secret, and in return asked him for a favor. He wanted to know where to find certain ingredients. At that moment, the scene briefly changed to show a mysterious man watching from afar both the protagonist and the bamboo teacher. Then the protagonist returned to his daily routine, eating, helping others, and receiving constant glances from a student. Meanwhile, his desk at school was covered in love letters. By then, the protagonist had mentioned that he was just starting his path in cultivation, so the bamboo offered him a special website to help him confused. The protagonist asked what kind of site it was. The bamboo explained that it was a place where modern cultivators gathered, and asked him to call. When he logged in that same night, the protagonist entered the website and was stunned. It looked like a completely different world, banging the table with his hand. He called the bamboo to ask him how many cultivators there were, and he replied that around 1.2 million. The protagonist was astonished. The teacher explained that there were many extraordinary people with unique abilities known as heirs of traditional arts, and that these abilities, they were considered intangible cultural heritage. So there was a site, dedicated web, and even a government department in charge of preventing those esoteric arts from being lost. Some sales within the community had even initiated this effort, and the government was also involved. The protagonist was even more surprised to hear that most cultivators were not able to dodge a sniper bullet traveling at thousands of meters per second, but that using these esoteric arts, they could do it easily. However, he also mentioned that every year many were arrested for breaking the law, and since anyone who strayed even a little off the path was warned finally. The bamboo shared the story of a man from the region, explaining that cultivation nowadays takes a lot of time and is not profitable. According to the man, he had dedicated 20 years to practicing cultivation, but his wife scolded him daily for not having a real job. Meanwhile, one of his friends, who had moved to the city, had already built a huge house. Thus, over time, many of those skills were lost. He added that nowadays, cultivation has become much more practical and adapted to the modern world. Therefore, he recommended to the protagonist that he simply register his information on a special website, where he would find numerous guides to get oriented, opportunities to communicate with other cultivators, and even in-person events like blind dates and group meetings. Additionally, as a bonus, when registering, he could receive monthly cooking oil and rice, upon hearing that the protagonist asked curiously how much food they would actually deliver. While he began to fill out the form with his information, meanwhile, at school, Shintan continued to steal hearts. Without even trying, thanks to his new and eye-catching appearance, the girls whispered among themselves and laughed around him, visibly captivated while he, somewhat bewildered, wondered in silence why he still hadn't received any response to the form he had submitted quite some time ago. As usual, his desk was covered with fan letters, but this time there was something more, a mysterious gift box. Intrigued, he carefully opened it and was completely shocked to discover a ring inside. Immediately he jumped up and asked loudly who had put that on his desk, as it seemed like an excessive and inappropriate gift. However, his colleagues looked at him with genuine confusion, and no one claimed responsibility. The next day he received a PlayStation, the following day a box of heart-shaped chocolates, later a high-end graphics card, and by the 5th day, another mysterious gift appeared. At this point, Shin-chan was completely overwhelmed since these weren't just simple fan letters. But someone was going too far. He became concerned and realized he needed to find out who was behind all this. Although none of the notes had a name or signature, that night, Quentin took all the gifts and letters home. The spirit within him, visibly curious, asked what he was doing. He replied that he was reading each of the letters, as he didn't have the heart to throw them away. Even though some were quite ridiculous, all had been written with genuine feelings. Then he explained that the letters could be classified into 3 main types. The first ones were from people asking for advice on losing weight. The second ones, quite strange, called him Dad. And the third ones, which were the most numerous, were where they confessed their love. Annoyed, Shintan shouted that none of the letters mentioned sending gifts. The slightly jealous spirit said he envied the protagonist for receiving so much attention. Shintan, on the verge of losing his patience, slapped him to calm him down, and the spirit, trying to reconcile, suggested that maybe the person sending the gifts simply wanted to remain anonymous, that maybe they expected nothing in return and had no bad intentions. However, Shintan firmly shook his head, insisting that he had principles and couldn't accept such luxurious gifts without knowing the identity of the person behind them. So he decided he would return them sooner or later. However, just after saying that, his stomach let out a loud noise. Embarrassed, he muttered that he was only going to eat a piece of chocolate and started looking for the heart-shaped box. However, things were about to get even more complicated. While Shintan was sleeping peacefully, his phone suddenly rang. Half asleep, he answered a call from an unknown number. On the other end, a man asked if he was speaking with Shintan. He, still drowsy, responded by asking who was calling. The man introduced himself as a member of the staff from the Traditional Arts Protection Network and informed him that they had received his application and would soon visit his home to verify the information. Before that, he had to join a nearby community group, and to facilitate his entry, they sent him a QR code. Shintan, annoyed, thought all of this was too modern, but nonetheless, he scanned the code. As soon as he entered the group, his phone began vibrating non-stop, with a flood of notifications. The group was total chaos. People were selling strange items, homemade medicines, and even weirder things, as if it were a black market hidden in the midst of all that disorder. The group members adored a figure known as Ancestor Sisiao, whom everyone praised as a true role model in the world of cultivation. Suddenly, Ancestor Sisiao sent a PDF file to the group. Shintan, hoping to find some ancient manual full of wisdom, opened it eagerly. But instead, the title read, Business Secrets, How to Get Rich. Complete table of contents. Disgusted and frustrated, Shintan slammed his phone against the table and immediately typed a message announcing that he would be leaving that stupid group. But just at that moment, the ancestor, Yao, stopped him by starting a private chat and directly messaging him, which immediately left Shintan stunned. So confused and irritated, he responded with annoyance, asking why she was messaging him. However, to his surprise, Yao asked if he was a student at the #1 high school, which left Shintan frozen, wondering how someone he didn't know could know that. That was when Yao dropped the bomb. She was the president of Shintan's fan club. This completely left him frozen, and to make matters worse, Yao admitted she had secretly taken a photo of him recently and then confessed that she was the one who had sent him all the mysterious gifts. Next, she wrote something that made the protagonist tremble. Shintan has slimmed down lately. He's not as cute anymore. I hope he gains a little weight. This horrified him even more, And as if that wasn't enough, the final blow was that Jiao was actually a girl. From that moment on, the story took a turn back to the past, revealing that the ancestor, Yao, was actually Yao Daxian, who began to tell her personal story. She explained that while some girls were attracted to rich guys and others to handsome ones, she had only fallen in love with one person, the chubby but adorable Shintan, since she was little. She had been a terrible student. Despite trying hard, she always got zeros on her exams and never managed to pass. One day, unexpectedly, her father burst into her room with a dramatic attitude. Although she thought he was going to scold her, her father instead told her not to worry because no one in their family had ever passed an exam. According to him, she should give up because failing was a family tradition, which he explained was proven by the fact that her hairband had the word try misspelled, sealing her fate. Nevertheless, instead of scolding her, her father pulled out an old dusty scroll from a drawer and explained that it was a family heirloom, a divination guide so accurate that it could predict anything anywhere. At this, Yao felt devastated, as all she wanted was to pass her exams, not become a street fortune teller. However, after thinking it over, she came up with an idea. What if that method really worked? So, although she was hesitant, she decided to learn to predict the future for her next exam. Instead of studying, she answered using divination coins and predictive techniques, and surprisingly, she passed. From that day on, she used that method to cheat throughout middle school and somehow managed to get into the same high school as Shintan. Once there, a teacher looked at her exam sheet with frustration, unable to understand it. Another teacher, an expert in the subject, approached and asked what was wrong with a sigh. The first one replied that they had a new problematic student named Xiao Dejin, who, although she answered almost all multiple-choice questions and technical exercises with apparent ease, wrote essays filled with absurd logic and made serious mistakes in math, physics, and chemistry. Moreover, she only handed in final answers, many of which were strange, without showing how she had arrived at them. Shaking his head, the teacher murmured that he no longer understood this new generation of students. Faced with this situation, the bamboo spirit master, intrigued, decided to intervene and promised to take action. Thus, the day of the decisive exam arrived, and among the present students was Xiao, who, upon seeing the exam, went completely blank since this time all the questions required development. There were no multiple-choice options, and they required deep analysis and reasoning. There was no way to guess, improvise, or manipulate the outcome. Overwhelmed by panic with trembling hands, she realized that without her guessing method, she wouldn't be able to pass that semester. Unable to do anything else, she broke down in tears in her mind and imagined the teacher looking at her blank sheet and saying that he couldn't even see the ink while the other students laughed at her. She considered the possibility of copying from the textbook, but saw the teacher at the front of the classroom, watching her intently like a hawk, which made her give up, convinced that it was divine punishment. Desperately, she prayed for someone, anyone, to come and save her. It was then that, unexpectedly, the protagonist burst into the classroom and sat right in front of her. At that moment, observing his back, Yao saw him as an angel. There was something in his posture, something firm and protective that reminded her of the calming presence of her parents, which filled her heart with warmth. Unable to resist, she began to silently copy from his exam while continuing to cry. Although she didn't faint after the test, something inside her changed forever. That moment became her turning point. She swore never to cheat again and committed to studying honestly from that day on. It was then that she truly fell in love with the protagonist, and later confessed to him that since that moment, no matter where she was or what she was doing, her eyes always sought him out. She felt that fate had tied their paths together. However, he did not share that perception and seemed clearly annoyed, thinking that the only reason she had noticed him was probably because of his enormous size. Then, shyly, she asked him what class he was in and what his name was. Realizing that she didn't know his identity, he decided to lie, claiming that he was a classmate and friend of Ziran. This left her completely surprised. Next, in a kind tone, he advised her to stop sending anonymous gifts and instead speak directly to Shin, to face her fears and confess her feelings honestly. Yao, completely blushing, she replied that doing something like that seemed too bold, like a scene straight out, kind of a romantic movie. However, despite that conversation, the gifts kept coming day after day, different snacks, meals, and small gifts, which made everything seem increasingly absurd, especially because the protagonist was still convinced that the one sending them was actually a boy who watched him in secret. To make matters worse, that person always brought him food he simply couldn't refuse. One day, just after finishing eating one of those dishes, someone burst into the place, shouting enthusiastically if Dad Chintan was there. Upon seeing the protagonist, the newcomer said that there was a freshman girl waiting for him in the hallway. Confused, the young man headed to the door, and upon encountering the girl, he wondered if it was really her. The girl straightforwardly explained that she wanted to take some photographs of him. Meanwhile, the students nearby began to murmur about how many times in recent days different girls had confessed to him. She mentioned that she knew he worked at the gym, and that she had even contacted the manager to organize a promotional photo shoot where he would appear training for an advertisement poster. However, her true goal was to take the opportunity to get closer to him. Later, at the gym, the girl confidently took several poster-style photographs of the protagonist in different poses. Once the session was over, the protag, still catching his breath, turned to the gym manager and asked what the story was with that girl. The manager, smiling as she watched her put away her camera, replied that she and Yao had known each other for a long time, that she had always been a bit mysterious, but also a good person. Then, pausing, she added that in difficult times, she had known how to guide her with just the right words at the most opportune moments. And thanks to that, she carried a compass with her, even if it sounded absurd. She confessed that that girl's advice had never led her astray. The scene then changed to another place where an elderly man was sitting in silence. It was a fortune teller, who was suddenly interrupted by an older woman who dropped money on the table and demanded he read her love fortune. Proudly, she claimed to be the leader of the largest square dance team in the neighborhood and wanted to know if she or her rival would win over the recently retired teacher, Wong. The fortune teller asked for her hand, and as he held her hand, she flinched and pulled it back abruptly, accusing him of being too rough. He explained that he was doing a bond reading and needed a firm grip to get an accurate reading. He then declared that her luck in love was very low and that it was most likely her rival would end up kissing the teacher. Furious at the prediction, the woman kicked him and walked away indignant. The old man, still rubbing himself, murmured that she was crazy as he got up and began to gather his things. It was then that a strange man appeared, an unusually looking cultivator. The fortune teller asked him if he also wanted a fortune reading, but the cultivator shook his head and explained that he had come to propose an alliance. He added that unlike the woman who had just left, he understood the true situation. Meanwhile, the woman was running toward the square, but suddenly stopped in her tracks upon seeing the man she liked right in front of her, Professor Wong, who was standing next to the leader of the rival team, both laughing and conversing intimately, and without warning, they leaned in and kissed, which made her heart silently break. What no one knew was that the old man, fortune teller, was not just any man, but one of the 10 most powerful cultivators in the Shanggu world, known as the ancestor of calculation. Upon being recognized, the old man became nervous, let out a forced laugh, quickly started packing, and tried to flee, unwilling to get involved in trouble. However, the cultivator chased him down and lifted his 3-wheeled cart into the air with one hand. The old man, alarmed, demanded to know what the young man wanted. The young man explained that he was neither a member of the city guard, nor part of the traditional arts protection group, but was also on the run, and asked him to look him in the eyes to verify his sincerity. Finally, both sat down to eat together, and while they shared the food, the cultivator remembered that in the past, he had been incredibly skilled, so much so that he could eat 6 servings without any problem. Right after that, he asked the old man how someone with that level of talent had ended up working as a fortune teller. The old man, with a mix of resignation and bitterness, confessed that years ago, he had made a mistake. He made a wrong calculation in a fortune telling, got involved in an online casino scam, and lost everything, even with his divine skills. His entire pension disappeared, and that's how he ended up ruined, resorting to fortune telling to survive. Then, with curiosity, he asked the cultivator what his story was, to which he replied that things were more complicated than they seemed, and that he wasn't even human, but a demon who had cultivated to reach spiritual form. To prove it, he revealed his true form, a bamboo rabbit. The old man, startled, scolded him for showing that appearance in public, warning him that someone might see him, but the rabbit's spirit reassured him, stating that he had already cast an illusion spell to avoid being seen by any passerby. Then, with a sigh, he began to recount his story. He told that he had lived near a bamboo-filled mountain which was his main source of food and that in particular, There was an enormous and highly nutritious bamboo shoot that he planned to eat on his 1000th birthday. However, before that day arrived, the bamboo cultivated consciousness, became a spirit, and flew away. The spiritual tribulation that followed caused thunder, lightning, and the total destruction of the bamboo forest in a fire. The worst part, explained the rabbit, was that the bamboo spirit that escaped became too strong to be defeated. For the last 40 years, the rabbit spirit had disguised itself as various students with the goal of observing and ambushing it, but a real opportunity never presented itself. He had seen how that bamboo spirit ascended from being a mere master to becoming the academy's principal, and recently, even made friends with a frustrated cultivator. The rabbit exclaimed that all he wanted was to eat some bamboo, which wasn't too much to ask, and indignantly claimed he was on the side of justice. The elder asked him to calm down, and the rabbit nodded, explaining that was precisely why he had come to ask for help, as if he paid him enough. He would surely agree to collaborate. He promised good food and a few thousand johannes, but the elder wouldn't be swayed, demanding 60,000 johannes. The rabbit froze upon hearing this and exploded, yelling if he was trying to rob him, claiming the elder was charging too much. He complained that his only source of income for the last 40 years had been robbing younger students every day without fail, rain or shine, and that despite this constant effort, he had only managed to gather 60,000 johannes, to the point that he was now even tapping into his wife's savings. The elder, with a sarcastic tone, told him to stop making up nonsense, that he was broke too, and asked him to think carefully about what was more important, his female or his bamboo food. The rabbit answered without hesitation that the female rat, in that case. The elder wanted to know why he needed his help, to which the rabbit explained that the bamboo spirit had a friend, a young man who seemed to have the power to warm his hands, and that this guy had been marked as a target by a divine cultivator. According to him, their relationship followed a dangerous pattern, and that's why he hoped the elder could hold those two students for a while, giving him the chance to fight one-on-one against the bamboo spirit. Then, he added provocatively, that surely the elder would be interested in that girl since she belonged to the family. Yao, the same one he hated so much. Upon hearing this, the elder smiled cunningly and replied that if that was the case, he would accept the task. The rabbit spirit thought this meant a discount, but the elder quickly clarified that for having given him that information, he would only discount 80 johannes. The furious rabbit yelled that this amount didn't even cover the food he had promised. Meanwhile, after several hours of intense training at the gym, the protagonist was finally leaving, when Yao stopped him outside and asked if they could walk together. Since they seemed to be going in the same direction during the walk, and unexpectedly she brought up the past, recalling how she had first noticed him during the final exams back then. He was quite chubby, and confessed she was surprised to see him calm and fit now, also admitting that even after he had lost all that weight, she couldn't stop thinking about him, just as it seemed she was about to confess her feelings. The protagonist sensed something strange in the air and told her they would talk later, even though they were right in the city center. He hadn't seen a single pedestrian in several minutes, which struck him as suspicious, especially when he noticed an old man following them from behind. Meanwhile, back at school, the rabbit spirit was heading toward the bamboo teacher with clear intentions, but before it could get close, a student saw it, ran toward it, and hugged it tightly, calling it soft and fluffy, convinced it was a boy dressed in a Pikachu costume. Seeing the scene, the teacher immediately scolded the student, explaining that costumes were not allowed at school. He ordered the supposed mouse to take off the costume and accompany him to his office. However, the rat spirit, visibly upset, shouted that it wasn't wearing a costume. At the same time, the protagonist confronted the old man who had been following them. Yao, suspicious, asked what he wanted, and the old man admitted he was impressed by the intensity in the young man's eyes, so he wanted to ask him for a favor. He then confessed he had been hired to delay them, but was willing to give the protagonist 59,000 of the 60,000 jones he had been paid, keeping only 1,000 for himself. As an alternative, he suggested they use that money to go shopping while he fulfilled his task. To win their trust, he even offered to reveal who had sent him. Meanwhile, at school, while the teacher escorted the rat spirit to the principal's office, the latter saw an opportunity, and without warning launched a surprise attack with a flurry of punches. However, he immediately realized he had missed, as the teacher was no longer in front of him but right behind him, calm. The teacher commented that he felt a demonic energy emanating from him, and accused him of secretly conspiring. At this, the rat exploded with fury, claiming he was not just anyone but his dad, and that he had raised him, changed his diapers, nurtured and watered him for 500 years. Without waiting for a response, he charged again, and they both clashed violently in a fierce battle. While all this was happening, the protagonist kept insisting on asking the old man who had sent him. He, laughing shamelessly, replied that if he really wanted to know, he would have to face him. He introduced himself as a martial artist who did 50 push-ups, ran 5 kilometers, and performed 30 sit-ups every day, also claiming he could climb 6 floors without breaking a sweat. He added that he only hesitated to fight because he feared the battle would suddenly become too bloody. His body began to expand. His muscles defined intensely, and his size increased considerably, leaving the protagonist completely astonished. At that moment, the fire spirit floating nearby murmured that the scene felt nostalgic, and to everyone's surprise, even Yao could clearly see the spirit. The elder then struck a pose, in the shape of a heart. He threw a few punches in the air and declared he was ready to fight. The protagonist, still confused, asked him how he had achieved such a body, to which the spirit explained that by channeling spiritual energy to the muscles, one could temporarily transform the body into the desired form, through an ancestral technique known as the Golden Body of Dharma. Right after that, the elder warned that his only intention was to delay them for a few hours, but if the young man resisted, he could break a few bones. Since he had private matters to discuss with Hayao, when he tried to touch her, the protagonist immediately intervened, blocking him with such force that the elder felt an intense heat emanating from his hand. Hayao stepped back, alarmed, and asked the young man to be careful. After the first attack, the elder yelled, accusing him of being too cruel, asking how he dared to disrespect his elders, while the protagonist, shocked, realized he had been sent flying with a single punch. It was at that moment that he understood the situation was much more serious than he had imagined. The elder was too strong to face. Without prior preparation, the spirit then explained that if the young man focused and thought of his most powerful form, he could reshape his body. As he had not cultivated enough, he lent him part of his own energy to help him. When the elder charged at him again, he was surprised to see that the protagonist's body had already changed. His old chubby figure had returned, but this time it was filled with strength. Easily the young man blocked the attack, and with a confident smile, he slammed the elder against the ground. The spirit, intrigued, asked how he felt, returning to his old body, and he replied that he felt amazing, as if he had regained his youth. Then, he grabbed him by the leg, spun him in the air, and threw him a great distance. Yao, who had been watching closely, looked at him in admiration, feeling lucky to witness such a transformation. However, the spirit warned that the young man could only maintain that form for 3 minutes. As his spiritual energy was quickly depleting, the elder, now incredulous, murmured that the power difference between them, it was like standing in front of a mountain. Still, he tried to convince himself that even though the protagonist was big, he couldn't be fast. Then he launched directly at Jiao, but the young man appeared behind him in an instant and lifted him up, easily from the ground. The old man shouted that his back hurt, while the protagonist warned him that if he kept resisting, he would end up with broken bones and muscles. Finally, the spirit that was watching everything closely noticed that the young man's energy was almost depleted and concluded that this battle was coming to an end.